Ladies and gents, this is the moment you've been waiting for. A podcast for podcasters. This is Creating the Greatest Show, and I'm your host, Casey Cheshire. Join me as we interview podcast hosts and investigate the ingredients of a successful interview podcast. We'll talk mistakes, earned skills, powerful questions, and more. This show is sponsored by Ringmaster, completely done for you B2B podcast production. I hit the button and we're going to do this thing. I'm excited. I can't wait to introduce the guest to you all today. It's one of those things where if I hadn't hit the record button, we definitely would have continued chatting about this really cool stuff, scotch, cigars, podcasts, all sorts of good stuff. And you wouldn't have been along for the ride. So I needed to make sure we did that. So who is this person I'm going to talk to? Man, he's an entrepreneur. He's a podcaster. He's a sales expert. He's a hustler, and he's got this podcast called SellingSaaS, and he's the chief everything officer at SellingSaaS. Duane Dufault, welcome, sir.
Casey, I love the intro, man. I really appreciate it. It makes it sound a lot more than what I actually am. But I'm happy to be here and excited. It'll be a little bit different of a podcast because normally when I'm on podcast, it's all, scaling revenue strategies and building startups and, training salespeople. So it'll be good to kind of talk about the back end of everything and kind of like how the podcast works and different things that we've done and that whole process. So it'll be pretty interesting to kind of make that transition today.
Yeah, it's a fun, side step to be able to talk about this craft that we both love. And you've got a great setup. You've got the background. We've talked about the fun exhaust fan and all sorts of things you got in your studio to really make it a comfortable and cool spot. So let me start out by asking you the question we start all of our episodes with. Duane, pull back the curtain for us on your show and share your most important strategy for a great interview podcast.
I would say you got to be curious and trust your gut in the conversation. You can have the coolest tool in the world to host it and schedule it. You can have all the tracking analytics of, downloads times and all that stuff. It all comes down to the conversation. Like if you can't genuinely be interested in the other person you're talking to, and if you can't hold a conversation, no one's going to keep listening to it. And the more you can accept that and like I said, have that genuine curiosity and have a real conversation with people and kind of forget that you're recording for an audience and just have that one interaction with that one person, you can really tell the difference. It's just like we were joking about the Joe Rogan podcast. One of the reasons why I feel that his podcast is so successful is because he started his career as a comedian on improv, and so he has perfected the and then type of thing to have conversations just continue to go. And so I think if you can go into these recordings or these podcasts, whatever you want to call them, and just be genuinely interested in another person and just kind of eliminate everything else, then people can be a part of that conversation rather than you presenting something to the audience. I would say for me, the thing I like most about it, and I think that makes any podcast successful, is just that level of curiosity and being able to be in the moment with whoever you're talking to.
Yeah, in the moment, not distracted.
Yeah.
Not checking your email, not just out in la la land, your phone, wife's texting. Like there's all sorts of distractions around us and you got to be in. So I got to be honest. I have a marketing podcast. You got the SellingSaaS podcast. The other day I was doing an episode and we were talking about some of the same marketing things we always talk about. And I was really challenged. Stay in. Have you experienced that? And how do you fight that?
What do you mean by stay in?
It was stuff I already knew. So I wasn't genuinely curious because I already knew the shit, and it was like, and maybe the people listening didn't. So that was my one hope, was maybe people listening don't know this stuff yet and they need to know this, but it's nothing new to me right now.
No, that's such a good topic. And even if you don't have a podcast and you're listening to this and you're in sales or marketing, that is the difference between people who, I would say, like successful sales reps and people who just barely make the mark, is they assume that their knowledge is the same as theirs, or that they don't have anything different. And even though, let's say you both memorize every word in a book, cool, that book may be different, but that person's perception or their interaction with the book could be different. And so instead, like, because I run into the same thing, I talk with sales managers, I talk to marketing people all the time, and it took me a while to kind of get into that too. And if you go back to the original episodes of SellingSaaS, the more long format ones, I was talking to other sales managers. It was only sales managers because it was called the Sales Leader Network, long format stuff. But getting into it, listening back, like I can hear that to where I was just waiting for the next question, because they're sales managers and I've been in it. I know what they're doing. And so it took me a minute to get through that kind of that wall of, I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. And so it's the way I keep myself interested. I mean, that's what it's all about. It's like, you can't be genuinely like, as if I'm interested in the conversation, is understanding their interaction with the information, like how they've, like if they, okay, maybe they measure the marketing funnel the exact same way. They've read the same books, same articles, they listen to the same podcasts, they have the same concept or practice inside of their marketing profession. But like, what are the struggles they have with X part of that? Well, like, how did they get to that point? And so it's almost like understanding the miniature origin stories of their experience rather than just getting the high level tactical stuff. Because then I feel like the curiosity side of our subconscious kicks in, because then it's something new, it's something novel, rather than everyone has the same definition of MQL, right? But that's
same. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Hey, you need to follow up on your sales leads.
Yeah,
you know,
like,
don't forget to log it in your CRM. Like, how many times are you going to hear that?
Yeah.
But what I'm getting from you is like, what's the context from that person saying that?
Yeah.
What led them to be so emphatic about that thing?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a story behind it?
Mm-hmm.
And do they have a unique perspective on it?
Yeah. It's one of the things I coach sales reps on is assumptions, and teaching them the difference between the knowledge they have about their product and the perceptions from their prospect that they need to unpack. It's like, yes, if you've got a sales team and a product or whatever, and your go-to-market is so vertically specialized that you can get the same type of customer every single time, and your sales rep talks to hundreds of them a month, and it could be the same problem, the same use case, the same revenue, everything, and it could be textbook, and it's really easy for a sales rep to just jump past all those things.
Yeah.
But when you do that, you insert your own opinion, your own experience into their world, and you're not able to actually get to the emotional connection that they have to the solution that you're providing. And so you have to really, really remove yourself from that. Like, I was literally crazy. I was just reshooting part of a course for a demo series that I'm doing. And literally part of it was not inserting assumptions, where you have to go and remove yourself from that. It's almost like check all of your knowledge at the door and ask about their experiences. But yeah, it's tough sometimes when it feels like you're talking to the mirror, and you can almost predict what they're going to say, finish each other's sentences. But it's all about getting their experience, getting their perspective, how they interacted with it. You know, what was their process for getting to that point of knowledge or whatever it is. And so if you're in that situation where you're talking to someone that's very similar to you, it's what was their experience getting to that point? Because 99% of the time it's going to be vastly different. There's going to be something cool you can talk about from there. Hopefully that makes sense, and it's easy to have everyone to understand, because that could be a hard transition to go from tactical questions to, you know, personal experience questions. Sometimes it makes people uncomfortable, but that's how I typically get through, is just ask about people's experience with that thing, and then most of the time they open up more, because then you've kind of like subconsciously given them permission to be more of themselves, rather than hopefully answering a question a specific way that you hoped for. So yeah, it's kind of weird to think about it that way, but the more you can get to the person behind the specific topic, the better the conversation usually is.
Yeah, I agree. I've always enjoyed halfway through that marketing show, by the way, marketing sales show, you know, fast forward, we'll have to have you on there, and I will practice these techniques with you. But the idea of fast forward and on that show, one of my favorite parts about that show is about halfway, I'm like, who are you? take me back in time, and we sort of walk into how they got into being a sales leader, marketing leader, famous entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I always find that way more fascinating because I think on the tactical side, I kind of joke, like I've actually heard everything I need to know about marketing. Like 300 plus episodes. I got it all, folks.
Yeah.
I'm good. Check, retire. But what I don't know is exactly what you're talking about, which is the context for this. Where did that perspective come from?
Yeah.
How did they end up with this? And perhaps there are some learning lessons in even how they got to this information.
Yeah.
So no assumptions. I love that. It's really powerful.
And like, just thinking about what you're saying there, when you give, so here's the funny thing about social media and all that stuff. Everyone always hears the result. When you talk to people about their journey or their story or their experience, it gives people insights as to like what it actually took to get to that level of, call it, expertise. And a lot of times it ends up being more relatable to the audience because they're probably in the middle of that stage where they're like, oh, on a scale of 1 to 10, the person you're talking to could be a 9 or a 10 out of 10 based on marketing experience. But maybe parts of the audience are at a 3 or 4, they're early stage. Maybe they're a marketing associate and they're like, oh my gosh, like this person's so good at this. And they think like, oh, they probably never had to do X. They never had to, argue with a CEO about using this type of language on a social media post and like having to, slap his hand for going in late on a Saturday night and putting money into Google, like, because that shit happens. But I think if you bring up that path that they took to, it's probably, it may resonate with other people to kind of bring them into the conversation more. And that's just, I think that a little assumptive of mine that may work, but just from like my perspective, when I'm listening to, there's a couple of shows like the SaaStr podcast. That's a good one about, software companies, or there's other like revenue specific or sales specific companies when they bring on people that I follow or that I've kind of taken similar steps, and they talk about their early days getting to the point where they're at. And I'm like, oh, I just went through that. And it kind of pulls me in a little bit more. So that's what I think about. And in those types of conversations, especially when it's like one-to-one or like for like scenario where it's like, what am I going to get from this? It's what can I learn from their journey or their experience up to that point?
Right. And there's still something to learn from that journey.
Yeah.
You mentioned the audience who may be that 3 or 4, they may be more junior. Here's a conflict for you. You're clearly, I introduced, did I say wizard? You're like up here expert, right? Like now to keep you curious, you're asking expert level questions that maybe your audience isn't there yet, or maybe they are. How do you balance that? Do you play to the audience more than yourself, or yourself more than the audience? How do you rectify that?
I don't know. I try to go off of what, the flow of the conversation, like, and there's an asterisk on that because the conversation could die off after a topic. So you have to do a little bit of prep work, right? Like you've got to come in prepared. You got to, like, if your guest has been on other shows, if they have a social media presence, if they've done things with other businesses, like do some research, have some context that you can ask them questions on. That you don't want to come in with a blank sheet. You don't want to come in with, the 100% wing it type of mentality and not have anything prepared. So you want to know a little bit about them so you can ask like questions that are going to elicit a response, not just how's your life been with marketing? What school did you go to? Like people care, but they don't care. So I would say have some things prepared. Go find out who they are, if they've been on other shows, if they've done some social media stuff, if they have a blog somewhere, go and find some things that are interesting. And if you feel the conversation is kind of going in a different direction, ask one of those questions. I mean, that's, I was just listening to a Joe Rogan podcast with Neil deGrasse Tyson, actually, earlier this week. And you could see that Neil, Mr. Tyson, whatever you want to call him, that sounds weird because like Mike Tyson, but he was going off on a tangent about a telescope, and you can just like hear that Joe Rogan like wasn't super interested in it, but then he was able to just ask a different question about something he knew from Neil deGrasse Tyson. And so prepare for those things. Like the old saying is you're always preparing whether you like it or not. The difference is whether you actually put an effort to prepare or you just plan on failing. So it's, if you go into those shows with a little bit of preparation, understand who you're talking to, take some notes, could be 3 or 4, you can call them emergency questions to where if the conversation's dying off, you can ask about it. That way you have a way to bring the conversation back up. It's a point of interest for that person. And it could stem a whole nother topic. But yeah, it is a very hard thing to balance of I'm talking to a CRO versus I'm talking to an account executive, and kind of bridging the gap there, especially if you run a podcast that's an entrepreneurial podcast, or if it's like a management podcast. The topics could range so widely that you could lose parts of your audience just by having one guest from this particular industry on there. And so it's tough though. Like if you have a theme for your podcast, like try to keep your questions around that if you can. But if you've got someone who's just not engaging, maybe in the podcast short, if you've got a 45-minute long podcast or something and they're only there, you can only get them for a good 20 or 30 minutes. You don't have to post every show you record. Like, just being honest, like if you got an episode,
do tell, man, spill the tea. You got some unreleased episodes?
Yeah. It's, you think you're prepared going into shows, you think you're ready to go. You've got all the notes, you've got all the things. And by the way, most of the time, at least from the shows that I've done and have been guests on, 90% of the notes that I take or prep go out the window. It's rare that I actually go through the bulleted list. Just want to make sure I'm prepared. But there's times where you get into it and maybe you didn't do a prep call and you jump right into it because you want the conversation to be a little more raw or whatever. But then you realize like this person's dry as hell, or we just our sense of humors don't align up, or we have such opposing views on the topic that it's just like this weird, tense conversation. Can it? Who cares? If you get a soundbite from it, cool, but it's okay. I've had two of those where I talked to a sales manager from a completely different industry. They sold not restaurant equipment, but they sold to catering companies, and they were talking about a certain strategy that I'm just like, I can't really get on board with that. I feel like that's slimy. I feel like that's unnecessary and casting a poor image. And I didn't tell him that on the podcast itself, but it was like you could tell, I could hear and see on the other end that he wasn't happy to be there. And so I just kind of read the room, and I was like, hey man, like this isn't going as well as I thought it was. Like, how are you feeling about it? Because I ended the recording and then asked him that question. He was like, yeah, I thought this, this feels like a waste of time. And I was like, hey man, like no harm, no foul. Let's just call it quits, and we just won't post it. And he's like, yeah, that sounds fair. And just like jumped off the call. And so it's okay. Like you're not every swing at the plate is going to connect, and you have to be okay with that. But on the other side of things, if you're recording weekly and you release weekly, and you're kind of backed up, it's like living paycheck to paycheck. If you're releasing recording to recording, you're kind of screwed. So it's a balance, right? Like if you get into a conversation and it's not going well, it's okay to say no. It's okay to take it. I've been a guest on a podcast, and the host was like, "Hey, let's start over." I'm not kidding. Because if you can't tell, I talk a lot. And we just got off on this tangent, and it was a podcast that was meant to be like super, super tactical with like bulleted things. And it wasn't about these long drawn out stories. And he just like, all of a sudden I see the recording stop, and he's like, yeah, I had to stop you. We went on 7 minutes around this topic. I was like, oh, my bad. Luckily I'm receptive and coachable with that stuff. Some people aren't, but again, it's okay. It's not going to be perfect. Understand that shit's going to happen. Things are going to fail. Your mics are going to fail. Your camera, your lighting will fall over at some point if you don't have it mounted. Like I have a light box to the right of me, this direction, whatever way the videos. And
you know what kind it is?
I'll show you.
Yeah.
So let me move the mic out of the way. So it's actually a Dasne off-brand LED box set that comes with a remote that mounts to the desk.
Nice.
So they're really cool. They were like $200 on Amazon. I got them 3 years ago, and they're really slick. They don't change colors, but they'll change color temperature and also how much light, like your intensity. So like 0 to 100, and so you can change them. You can put them on different channels and stuff, but it's still kind of harsh. So I put a diffuser box on one of them. So I'll show you in the video. So if you're watching on the video, this is diffuser box.
Nice.
It's and so what it does is it allows it to distribute the light evenly across the face or yourself or whatever. And the other one without that box is just a square LED panel. But I've had that fall because that light is meant to go on a different mount, which has a clip for the desk. And so it clips to the side of it. So if you have a sit stand desk like I do, all of your equipment will go up and down with you. So you don't have to move shit around every time.
Yeah.
I would, that's one of the things, like I have a huge desk. But yeah, the lights, things will happen. Your equipment's going to fail. You're going to get kicked out of Zoom. Your computer is going to want to restart. And so don't run yourself ragged and right up to the wire with things. Be diligent about prep work and making sure your equipment's working and use it regularly. So if you're on Zoom calls all the time, one of the things I do, this is where I work. Like this, not only is my recording studio, but this is where I work. I run my business from this chair. So I did, when we went in quarantine, I basically was like, I can't bounce back and forth between things. I got to do it at home. So I just made my office my studio. So I literally, my walls I've turned the camera around, but it's mounted, are lined with acoustic panels from a company called Acoustimatic. Sure. They have Owens 703 or Owens Corning 703, 2 and 4 inch panels. So it's rigid insulation. It's really great. Blocks all the noise, but things are going to happen, and stressing out over those things and not doing the work to make sure things go smoothly while you're recording is paramount. It helps sets a solid foundation so you can focus on the guests when you're in there. And I've had it happen plenty. I had a mic fail. I used to have the I'm operating on the Shure MV7 right now, the USB version of it, which it has the XLR. It's the dual one, so I can, if I ever feel like doing unnecessary work with XLR cables, I can do that. But I had the Blue Yeti mic. I had the Blue Yeti before that, and that was totally unintentional. It was when we went to quarantine. I had no experience with mics like that. The only mics I knew of were like the Logitech headset things for call centers.
Same.
And I was like wanting to do it on a budget. So I found that mic on Facebook Marketplace for $50. Had no idea it was halfway decent mic. And I had that up until maybe 6 months ago. Not gonna lie, I had it for a long time. And then I finally got one of these things, and it's very, very versatile, which is nice. I just don't like the Shure emblem on the side, but whatever.
Constant ad that they don't have to pay for.
Exactly. I'm gonna like paint it and then put my logo right there.
Should paint it. Put your sticker right on top, man. SellingSaaS. Yeah. Actually, if it says SellingSaaS right there, that'd be pretty sick. Yeah.
My wife, she doesn't do it on Etsy, but she's got one of those little Cricut things where she cuts out vinyl. She makes shirts and all. So we got 4 kids, so she's always
hell yeah.
And so I was like, she made me some vinyl stickers of my logo actually for my birthday a few months ago. What do I have anymore? But yeah, it's like little things.
Does she do that? Does she have a website?
No. And I asked her, I was like, hey, do you want to do this? She's like, no, I don't want to like have an obligation. I was like, okay.
Totally get it. My wife loves to crochet, right?
Yeah.
Really helpful when you have no hair and you'd like a hat. Yeah. Hey, there's a hat that can instantly happen. And she figured out how to make some like Princess Leia hats and some all sorts of really funky, cool, like a redhead hair hat, really fun stuff. And she actually, made a little Etsy shop, and that was cool. Yeah. And then Star Wars came out with a new movie, and then the whole internet wanted those hats. Oh, and she was like, I got to close this thing down, man. I'm not going to make 30
a day
Princess Leia hats, right? It's like, she's like, I just do this for fun. So totally
get charge more for it. When the demand's high, you can control the pricing.
Dude, I was trying to say that, hey, just make those hats cost $300.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't sound, no, hey, someone will want it. Someone's
gonna buy it. And you can go get it registered with Disney now that they own Star Wars, and then you can register each hat and then charge you even more. Like, it's crazy. I was trying to get my wife to do similar stuff when she used to be a fitness coach and personal trainer years ago. Cool. And I was like her business manager. I was trying to, because all she wanted to do was just like train people and show up. And like I was creating ads, like I was filming her like in the gym training people, and she didn't know I was. And I would turn that into like a Facebook ad and like drive traffic. And she's like, why are all these people messaging me? And like, I don't have time for all this. I'm like, it's because I'm building your business. She's like, I didn't want to do that. She's like, I just wanted to train like a small amount of people.
Like couple people.
Yeah. She's like, I like small group. And I was like, okay, fine. I was like, do your own thing. So I like shut the whole thing down. But yeah, I looked at her when she started making those. I was like, do you want to do this? You want to make some money with it? She's like, no, don't. She's like, don't even start. I'm like, okay.
See, now, if you ever get mad at her,
Yeah.
the punishment is you send her a bunch of traffic, right?
Yeah.
Like I thought about it. This never happened. I never had the opportunity.
Yeah.
But, had it been like, we're kind of having a little fight or something, I would just go create a little Facebook ad and spend $300 on it, driving traffic to your Etsy site.
Right.
Hey, baby, you have 50 hats.
Right. Like, good luck. Have fun.
I'll see you later. I'm out with the boys tonight.
Right.
That'll be hilarious. So you mentioned prep a couple times, and preparing for the disaster, preparing for the guest. Mm-hmm. Could you talk to us about your prep rituals? What do you do on your own? Do you do any prep with the guest?
Yeah. So I'm not super strict about it, but I at least make sure I do a couple of things. One, I absolutely make sure I go and look them up. I see what they've done, what their work history is, just because my podcast is SellingSaaS, talks about all go-to-market strategies and stuff. So I make sure that I know what their background is ahead of time, so I can ask them specific questions. And I try to find them if they've been a guest on any other show, so I can hear them beforehand, so I understand their tonality, their cadence, how they speak, which, kind of repeated myself there, but it's important to just get some perspective on your guest to understand what their outlook is on things, and potentially stay away from certain topics. Like if they are passionate about something and you don't know that, and you ask questions on it, it almost always derails the conversation. So I'm always trying to find out, like, where are the potential red flags that I don't want to go down, because as much as negative news goes viral, it's really not great when it's just you and that person on the call. So it's just figure out like what their history is, and if they've been on any other shows, and then always give yourself a few minutes before the show starts to turn everything on. If you need to run an update on your computer, just do it really quickly so things don't shut down. Make sure your mic is plugged in. You've got audio. I literally made that mistake the other day. Like I was mentioning a second ago, I'm recording a bunch of new stuff for some online course content. And I also have a lav mic. So it's a lavalier mic that sits on your collar. And I have a wireless one. It's the Rode Wireless Go. And I've got that plugged in so I can move around and all that stuff. And I didn't switch the inputs on my mic when I went to go record the next video. And so it was like, because I can hear myself in my mic. Yeah. It's a playback. I don't know how people don't do that, or they can't hear themselves. It's just a weird thing that I do, so I know if I'm yelling too loud or something. But
yeah, monitoring's great, right?
Yeah. So that's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
Is your mouth near your mic the right way? Are
yeah.
you blowing it up? Are you too quiet? Yeah.
Plosives. Are there things in the background that's picking it up? So is your gain set too high on the mic or something? But what happened was I can hear myself because I monitor it. So I can hear myself in the mic, but I never switched the inputs on my computer on which mic to use as the primary. So I did like a 15-minute recording session, and I can hear myself. So I'm thinking I'm good to go. And then I go and listen to the playback efforts on processing, 0. And I'm like, oh, so it's like,
oh, no, 0. It wasn't even like faint.
Nothing. Just 0. And I was like, oh shit. So it's paramount that you have some type of checklist for your equipment before you hit record. So it's a little bit of research to understand the background, either work history or if they're doing other shows, and then making sure your equipment's set up so you don't have those technical failures. One of the main reasons is you want it to be a good experience for the guest, right? Yeah. It's be a good host, like literally be a good host. And then depending on your show, like if it's short form or long form or the topic, try to have either a strategy or prep call before getting into it. Kind of like what we did. We had 30, 45-minute session. We were just kind of going on and on, getting to know each other. So either do that before the conversation, or allow for 10, 15 minutes before you start recording. Like, okay. Because when you're listening to podcasts where they don't do that, you can almost always tell. The first 15 to 20 minutes of the podcast are just like mind-numbingly boring, or there's like that weird tension that they aren't clicking, where it feels like an interrogation, where there's no rapport between the guest and the host.
They don't trust each other yet, right?
No. Like, so it's
It is. What's worse is when you're in that no trust zone because you didn't do a prep call, and then you ask something personal, like, tell me about your biggest failure. Like, tell me your life story. What was it like as a child? And you're like, dude, we just met, so you're gonna get my super scripted answer because I don't know you yet.
Yeah, and what's a really good example of this is when you're listening to, you can go to like Ed Milet's podcast, or you can go to like a Lewis Howes or Tom Bilyeu or any of those, because a lot of times when people are launching books, they'll go to all these different podcasts, and you can tell which one of those hosts either knows them personally or like did a prep call beforehand, because the way they'll deliver their answers, the way they'll interact, it just feels more genuine. And the more you can have that. And so it's good to always have that prep time. Like I love unscripted shows, but I don't like not having that connection with people. I love getting into rapport and understanding, what makes them tick. It's one reason why I like leadership so much, but it's you got to have that connection with them, or else this show is going to go off on a rocky start, or you're going to ask that hard-hitting question, that emotional question, and they're just not going to give you a good response. It's not going to go the way you wanted it to, and then it's going to. It happened to me once where they didn't do a prep call. There was very little back and forth, and they just came in and like instantly asked me like hard questions. And in my mind, I'm like, you're just getting downloads. That's all you're doing. You don't really care.
Yeah.
And that's tough, even though it will happen that way. It's much better for the relationship between you and the guest when you take time to actually get to know them because you give a shit. Like it's so much better for the guest experience. It's so much better for the reputation of the podcast, because they'll tell their friends. They're like, oh, this person's only out for the downloads. And so that's tough, like, because you want to build the rapport, you want to have that, but then you don't want to lose a bunch of stuff on the recording. Like I'd rather record a shorter episode and have a good connection with someone than have the total length that you need to make Apple happy and the first 20 minutes of it being shit. Right. So it's good to, again, do the prep, but don't overly script the show. Make sure you test your equipment, but spend some time with the guest to get to know them. Because sometimes it takes longer for people to open up. Like,
sure,
I've had guests, actually recent guests, where she's not of the type A mentality.
Sure.
And it's hard for me at times to not steamroll those conversations and really allow that individual to come out. And it's actually really good for me to have those conversations sometimes, because it gut checks me of like, okay, shut the hell up. Like, really let this person speak their mind and get into who they are in the show. And but it's a good example of just getting someone different on the show and connecting with them beforehand. But we had almost 30 to 40 minutes before we hit record of just getting to know each other.
Wow.
And sometimes it takes me longer to match that type of personality, just because of how I am. Because I used to, when I would be on podcasts, I'll listen to some that I've done years ago, and I'm like, oh, I sound like such a jackass. Like I sound like a clown because I'm like overly animated. I'm like, blah, 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 and I'm like saying things so articulate, like I've practiced the question 100 times. I'm like, that doesn't even resonate with me now, and that was me. And so it's tough for me sometimes to do that, because the old habits of stage presence and old habits of reciting phone calls and certain parts of speeches and talks and trainings and stuff, that it's hard for me not to get into that mode. And so I think having different types of guests do help with that. But yeah, I would say I know it was a very long-winded answer to your question, but the prep work and stuff, but it's you gotta spend time to get into rapport with someone and understand who they are and how they communicate, so you can match that. Super important. I wouldn't say it's one of the most important things, but it's really, really important to have a good show, a good conversation with people.
Yeah, it jumpstarts things, right? I think sometimes with Rogan, people think, oh, he didn't do a prep call, he's talking to someone famous. Yeah, he may not have done a prep call, but they probably spent a good 30 minutes to an hour walking around his like 6 studio looking at weird Wolverines and flamethrowers and like shooting the shit. And if you also listen, he spends the first 30 minutes like they're drinking whiskey, smoking cigars. It doesn't really get hot until an hour in. And then you're really jamming unless he already knew the person and they're old comedy buddies or UFC. Otherwise, he's cold in there too. And it takes time. So this prep thing you're talking about, I love the emphasis on the not just the prep research, but the prep rapport, the prep connection. And if you can do that, I mean, think about our call. What I love about this show is it's so meta, right? Because we're really talking about stuff. We were about ready to go get tequila in Mexico, right? We're talking about cigars. We're talking about scotch, and I'm like, shit, we probably should record this, but like that, okay, we're good. Let's go hit this thing. We didn't have that awkward like dating moment where you're trying to eat spaghetti and you can't in front of someone because you just met. It's like, oh, screw it. I'm gonna get spaghetti on my shirt. I'm that guy. Yeah. Whatever. Let's get into this thing. It's a great way to start the show out.
Yeah, it's really being a listener. I listen to podcasts all the time, listen to book on tape. And it's one of those things that you can pick up on if you listen to enough shows, and you can't usually, if you can't put your finger on why a show seems to be better than other shows, if it's some off the wall topic that you never like. I listen to, for example, the JRE show, Joe Rogan show, to break up my self-improvement or my sales and marketing information that I listen to all the time. Totally. But it's just a nice change of pace. But when you listen to other shows, like some of them will pop up as recommended, you'll get in there and you can't really put your finger on like why the show sucks. And it's usually because there's no connection or rapport between the guest and the host. It's just monotoned interrogation is what it sounds like.
And it's being very transactional, right? Yeah. I'm here to get the press. You're here to get the press. All right. Yeah. Let's do this. I don't know if you've heard any of the Lex Friedman shows. Have you heard any of those?
You're the second person to bring that name up, though.
Yeah, he's really just blown up in my mind. He was on JRE a couple times, and so I'll bro out with Rogan, but Lex, super smart guy. One time I couldn't get to sleep. I put his interview on where he interviewed like a biochemist. Man, that night, Casey. It was good. He's very smart, and so if I want to really challenge myself, I'll listen to that. But here's something that no one talks about. He interviewed Zuckerberg, and
this
one
Lex
of the things.
Friedman guy.
What's that?
The Lex Friedman guy.
Yeah, Lex did. Okay. Lex interviewed Mark, right? And right before they got started doing anything, they're recording. He passes him like a robot AI check that has like pictures of cars and is like, circle all the cars on here. As if he's a robot. Yeah. Lex wants to make sure he's a real person at the very, like, you can't do that cold with someone. Like, they had some nerd rapport happening before they hit record because he actually fills it out. He fills it out. Well, during the recording, it's like anyone that's not prepared for that is going to be like, screw you. I'm out. Right. No, they had something going on. So that just made it fun. Oh
yeah. You got to know your guest. Like he's interviewed some crazy people on here. He's got Kanye West on his show.
He did. Yeah. I heard about 45 seconds of that one. That was tough, but he literally tried to reason with him. I mean, Lex is a really nice guy. He talks about love all the time. He's Russian. Yeah. And he always wears a black suit with a black tie. He's got wardrobe. He's got like a costume he wears. Yeah. Which is cool. But he tried, man, but oof,
that's funny.
That was rough.
Yeah. It's, and your podcast may not, you said it like Lex's show will put you to sleep. And that's the other thing too, is your show's not going to resonate with everybody.
Right.
Like it's not, and that's okay. Like if you're not comfortable with people not liking your show, then don't go outdoors or don't leave your house and throw your phone away. Cause it's like, there's billions of people on the planet. If you can just get, a couple thousand of them to enjoy your show, then you can make money on your podcast too. Like it's all you need. And so I think it's just following the framework of, be genuinely interested in your host or in your guest. Make sure all of your systems function and it's easy for the guest to get in there and look to make that connection. Like do the work to prep ahead of time to where you actually feel like you're having a conversation with someone. If you don't put in the effort towards that stuff, then why do you expect to have a podcast that anyone wants to listen to?
Yeah. So. And even imagine, you mentioned a couple thousand. Even the other day I had this thought with like, even if I had one download, let's say they listen to the entire thing.
Yeah.
That's an hour they spent with me. That's an actual other human, unless it's a complete simulation and you're like an NPC, but like it's a whole nother human. It was like, I want to listen to this thing. It's like, damn, that's weird. And that's cool. And of course it scales and it's 1,000 people or whatnot, but it's like a really cool honor to have that many.
It is really, I remember when I got my first written review, I was like, I was like, well, it was like a 5-star. It wasn't like I haven't gotten a bad one yet, but I remember that feeling of like, this is really cool. I wasn't expecting to get like a 5-star, to have that feeling of that 5-star review, feel that good. I'm like, I shouldn't be this excited. This thing is a massive amount of effort. It sucks the money out of me, but it's so much fun to do. But I'm like, that one person took the time. It takes like 2 minutes, but like, that's so cool. So it's like, I feel like podcasting is like the ultimate version of dark social, right? Like if you guys have ever heard that weird terminology now, it's just nothing but a giant pool of lurking individuals that just get to listen to you breathe too heavy if you don't do your editing right. But it's crazy. Like you have this audience that you never see, you never hear, and they just sit and listen to you. And it's really cool, but also nerve-wracking at the same time. Like I mentioned his show the other minute ago, Ed Milet. I followed him for years. Big stuff, millionaire, business guy, motivation, tactical, really talks about mindset. And he's got millions of followers just from his podcast, millions. And it's crazy. Like imagine having a show to where the moment you launch it, your downloads for that one show has got commas in it, multiple commas like that. That'd be like, that's bananas. Like I'm excited when one show has like 100 downloads inside of the week that it was released. I'm like, that's cool. Yeah. It's really crazy. And it could take 1 or 2 guests or 1 or 2 episodes that were, promoted the right way. And you can have audience for life, which is really cool. So totally.
Love the shift a little bit. And because this is it's a podcast within a podcast. It's Inception on the recording. How is your time? Do you have more time? Do you have a hard stop?
Yeah, right, I'm good.
Cool. And
real quick, I would say on that for time, always add buffer times.
Well, that's what I want to talk about. Okay. So tell me buffer times. Go for it.
Yeah, I know me. I know that I get on tangents. My wife says I like the sound of my own voice, and probably true, because if you edit your own podcast, you kind of have to. But I always add buffer times. I add 30 minutes. So I'll have like the scheduling link, right? Like everyone does. And it's got the link to get into Riverside and all that stuff. But I'll have it to where there's 30 minutes blocked off before and 30 minutes blocked off afterwards. Wow. So that way I'm not like, if you like everyone listening to this, they have a job. And if they have a show they need to record in the middle of the day, it's really tough to squeeze that in. And if you're in a meeting, if you're on a Zoom call or whatever, and then it goes right up until the hour, you have to scramble and get into the recording, and then you don't have time to do any of the things we just talked about. Yeah. So I always try to buffer the time, 30 minutes before, 30 minutes after. That way, if we go over, we can go over. And maybe the guest can't stay, but then that gives you 30 minutes to kind of wrap things up, write down any additional notes. If there's any talking points you want to go back to pull for like social posts, like if you want to go back in there and like grab a specific clip because you thought it was really cool, then you write that stuff down. So give yourself time in your day to where you again prep, but then you have that debrief session too. So it's really good to have that 30-minute buffer. But like you just asked me if I'm good on time, don't assume that your guest can do the same thing and just continue talking.
Yeah. Have you ever had that? Have you ever had someone bumble gets a hard stop? And it's like, it's kind of embarrassing / just, it sucks. Cause like you're usually just getting into it and they're like, I gotta go.
Yeah. And that's tough. Like if you don't do, if you don't do the prep call beforehand, like if you don't spend time, if you don't spend time a few days before, it could be 15 to 20 minutes just to get to know each other. And you do that on that call and it's an hour invite, it's an hour time block, and you spend 15 minutes of it not recording. And then there's like that weird 5 minutes in the beginning. And then you may get 30 to 40 minutes out of it. And that could be plenty. But then if you're putting them in a bad spot. I remember I didn't communicate that to one guest in particular, but we did have a prep call beforehand. And I feel bad. She was she just got promoted to director of sales at this company. She'd been in the role 2 months. and she was on the show, and literally, I think we went a minute over the hour, and I was able to wrap it up because I could see it on her face when I was looking at the time, and I'm like, mentally, I'm like, oh shit, we gotta go. And I literally just kind of ended the show. Luckily, she had kind of stopped talking. Maybe she was aware of the time, but I was like, perfect. I want to be respectful of your time. If there's anything else that you want to let the audience know or where they can find you, now's the time to do it. And she said it really quick and then bounced. And I stayed on to wrap up the show. And I got it. Like I saw it. I saw the time. I saw like her face and stuff. And so she just bounced, and I was like, awesome. Thanks. I appreciate you being here. Everyone on the audience, go follow her. It was probably like 90 seconds of just me, and she was gone. So
that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Because they don't know she bounced,
But yeah, it's again, preparing for that type of stuff, making sure that you've got a good way to interrupt that person and let them know, like, practice how you're going to do it. If you're not in sales and if you're not the type A person who talks to humans all day, every day, you should practice these things. Practice lead-in questions, practice transition questions, practice your opening line, your intro, practice, your exit conference, like all of these things, you should have them ready to go so you don't fumble over yourself and feel like you sound like an idiot, because no one really cares. It's only you that care about how you sound. And at the end of the day, because something I tell my kids is people don't really think about you the way you think they think about you. So you're always in your own head. And so if you don't prepare, you're setting yourself up for failure. And then it comes through in your tone and your mannerisms. So I would say to do these things, these transition questions, these subtle nudges for guests to continue talking or wrapping a meeting or a call up, practice that stuff. That way you're prepared and ready to go.
Yeah. Have it squared away. I love the idea of starting super clear and squared away and then ending the same way if you can.
Yeah.
That happened to me too the other day with someone who had to bounce, and what I want to avoid is like a bye phone conversation hang up, right? Okay, take care. Okay, bye. And you're like, this is kind of a podcast, but I did a little bit. I didn't do 90 seconds, but I did a little bit of a. All right, everyone, this has been. I did my ending, but so you want to be clear.
Do you do like a housekeeping thing before you get into it? Like before you hit record, do you like do house like it, when you do like when people do webinars, you're like, a couple housekeeping tips, like the message box over here, before you hit record of them, do you like, what do you tell them about how it ends and distributed and stuff?
Yeah, it's a good question. I usually try to address those things on the prep.
Okay.
So before hitting record on the show, I just like to remind people how the beginning starts so we don't step on each other there. Like, I'm going to introduce you. You say hi. I'll tell people the theme. And then I'm going to ask you that first question. The first question is X. And last time on the prep, you said, why was your just so that they've got a sense for, oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then on the end, I don't usually let them know, but I actually have it and we'll experience it here. I have it mapped out so that you know exactly when you should talk.
Yeah.
And I sort of like am controlling it Jedi style so that it cleanly ends so that you don't necessarily need to do anything, but you'll experience it momentarily.
No, I appreciate the clarity. On that note, one of the reasons why it's really good to do that housekeeping stuff, and we'll have to do like a quick bulleted list of all 6 or 17 of these things we talked about, but
yeah, totally.
The housekeeping thing is really important because we're talking about ending the show, ending the podcast. One, it's really important to know when to end it. But you want to tell them how it's going to end. Are they supposed to stay on after you stop recording? That's
a great point.
Right? Like little things like that. Cause I've had ones where I hit stop and then they just bounce. I'm like, oh,
it just bounced.
Like, okay, my bad. And I've done that too. Like I've done that to where I was on a podcast where she does this whole production, like super, super nice. She's I think she has I think it was called Not Your CMO, or was it? Anyways, but I just left because the way she had set it up was like a YouTube transition screen for that, like a had that whole nice productive production vibe to it. And I left after 5 seconds because that was the ending, was that thing, but I didn't know that I was going to stay on. And I get an email from her. She's like, hey, so sorry I didn't let you know that we're going to stay on for a couple minutes and talk about distribution, like where it's going to go. And I'm like, oh, like that would be cool to add to my show. And that
let me know that, especially if it's weird,
yeah,
confusing with like YouTube. Yeah, you don't know whether to stay on there or not. Yeah,
yes.
totally.
So that's good. Like a really good housekeeping thing of just letting them know, like, here's the logistics. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get an email when the show comes out. It's not going to be from me. If someone on the show is using a production company, the email is going to come from this person who works with me. It's going to have this and this, and like really work on communicating transparency. And here's the cool part about that. And this is something that I coach sales reps on. When you set the intentions for that call, and you communicate that level of like clear communicating expectations, it gives them permission to do the same thing with you. So that way, when you're talking to them in your show and you're asking them questions, they know the standard. They know that, oh, I can be clear, I can be concise, because you just showed them how to do that by setting the expectations on the housekeeping stuff. So it does a couple of things when you do that. It feels controlling when you first do it. You're like, oh, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. When we wrap up, we're going to do this and this. But it sets that standard for how the conversation can go, so you can have more of a visceral interaction with them.
And you can't over communicate expectations, right? And especially, who knows? I mean, a podcast is like an art form. I've joked that one day we're just going to sit there with microphones and eat a bag of chips, and like people would listen, right? Probably scarily more listens to the bag of chips podcast than our sales or marketing shows. But like, they don't know what's going to happen. So back to your thing on assumption, don't assume that they're going to just know how to open, close, all the things, how it goes, right? What energy are you going to have?
Yeah.
Bring your A game, your B game. One quick thing. You block off an hour. Is that what you do? Block off an hour with the buffers on either side for you?
Yeah. So I send the invites for an hour, and then I go in and add 30 minutes before and after on my calendar. And again, that's part of the housekeeping. I let them know. Like, I try to let them know ahead of time, like, hey, I have 30 minutes blocked off after this, just in case we go over. And much like you did for me, I'll ask them, like, hey, do you need to be out of here at the top of the hour? And if it's a yes, then I'll keep look at the clock. So that way I can let them know, or if I want to jump to a question, or maybe they said something earlier in the conversation. I was like, hey, we're respectful of time, but I want to get to this point. Earlier, you mentioned X, like, help the audience understand that. So it gives you that ability to control the conversation, be respectful of their time, and still create a good experience. So there's a lot of stuff going on a show that you need to pay attention to: the prep work, the setup, paying attention to time. It takes a while to kind of get into that, but what helps is being guests on other people's shows too. Like, the more you can be guests on other shows, especially in the early days, and taking notes about what you like, what's weird, what you don't like, and then doing practice runs with yourself on that. I'm really big into role plays with like sales reps and stuff. And so I got that habit of, all right, this is new for me, I'm going to go and try it. This is new for me, I'm going to go and try it. So it's really important. Like, write it all down, run yourself through the process, go and be on other shows. But yeah.
Are you making a move toward more and more short form? I think we might have chatted about that a little bit.
Oh yeah, that's a good topic. So when I first started my show, which is SellingSaaS podcast, it was originally called the Sales Leader Network, and the concept was to not be tactical with sales leaders, because like everyone and their mom seems to have a playbook on cold calling, or here are the 3 things you need to do to close a demo. Like everyone seems to be overly tactical. And I'm like, no one's talking. We kind of mentioned earlier about the journey, their specific origin story. And like, no one has insights or experience on what it's like getting to become a VP of sales or a CRO, or, if you've gone through the ranks or whatever. And so that was what the show was about. It was, what is their origin story? What was their, first failure as a sales manager, and really unpacking the things that nobody really talks about. And that was 45 minutes to an hour. Hell, one of them was 90 minutes, but we cut it up into 2-part episode. And that was actually one of the more popular series anyways. I think there was like an anticipation thing, but the feedback that I got from listeners and people that I know that listen to the show, so this is one reason why listening to your audience is good, is they are B2B professionals. They're at work and they're no longer commuting. They're not sitting in their cars. They're not, driving between lunches and all that stuff. And so they weren't able to listen to it as much as they wanted to, because they don't have that anymore. Whereas if that was the format maybe 3 years ago, it probably would have done a lot better, because the data behind was like the listens were dropping off like after 10, 15 minutes, but that was because they would do it in between phone calls. So what I did is a couple things. One, I shortened it up. I took them, they're still 45-minute to an hour long recording sessions. So we'll still block off the hour, but I'll have them edited down to 6 or 7 clips that are like 5 to 10 minutes long. So the intro of the podcast is get like quick hits in 10 minutes or less, and so people can get in there, and they're literally, it's the question and then the answer to that question. And so it's part of that conversation. Some of the clips are like full 7 or 8 long minutes, or some of them are real quick 2 or 3 minute long episodes. But the goal is so that way people can listen to the impactful parts of the show in their own time frame. And then it's not like, and this is something I'm experimenting with right now, is let's say you have that show with, John Doe, horticulturalist person, whatever your topic is. And it's an hour-long episode that you record, but then you have it edited down to 8 episodes. Normally, you would think of just play 1 through 8. On Monday, we launch 1, and then Tuesday, we launch 2, and Wednesday, Thursday, so on and so forth. I realized that actually doesn't work that well. People they don't anticipate it. So I actually break it up. So I'll do the recording, but then I'm always 3 weeks ahead, so I can mix things up. And so I'll put the first episode from one guy on a Tuesday, and then I'll do the 7th episode from a different guest on the Wednesday, and then the 3rd episode. So I'll break it up. I'll try to keep, so it's more challenging to do that. But it keeps the shows different. So it's a different tone from the guest. It's similar topics. Like I'm trying to get it to where it's like a weekly topic for, revenue acquisition strategies and stuff. So like maybe one week it's all about something like product-led growth. And here's all the conversations I've had over the last few weeks with people about product-led growth. Or next week it could be paid campaign marketing for SaaS companies. And so all week it's all the conversations. So I'm experimenting with that right now. But so I went from the long form and then went to the short form based on feedback from listeners and audience and stuff. And so I've been doing that since the beginning of October 22.
Now you said that a lot of this came from some great feedback.
Yeah.
And earlier we said we don't usually get feedback. So when you get some, it's like, thank you. How can I help you here? Like, I love the change. Please give me feedback. Right. So you got this feedback. Curious though, have your tastes for consumption changed, or is this entirely purely for said audience?
Really good question. And here's why. Your podcast isn't for you. And that was the pill I had to swallow with this feedback, because I was producing a show that I would have listened to. But if you're not the ideal audience or listener, then you can't look at it through that lens. It's just like the business founder who builds this product, but then their customers are telling him that he needs something else, and he doesn't listen, and then the business goes under because he's not taking the feedback and iterating on his same thing. Right. It was but my consumption side of it, to answer your question a little bit more directly, is that hasn't changed. I don't listen to short form shows. I like listening to long form podcasts. I go on long walks once a day where it's 30 to 45 minutes, and that's what I listen to. And I go on runs or on bike rides, or if I'm in my gym, I listen to those podcasts. And so my habits haven't really changed in that area. And so it's hard to make that separation. It's hard to do that and not do what you want to do. It's definitely a challenge to make that adjustment, but my consumption, my listening habits, I still listen to 45-minute to an hour-long episodes, sometimes 90, depending on what we're doing. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of situation to be in.
Tell me, did that change? You mentioned like a particular moment when that changed. When did that realization happen where the show isn't for you, that you aren't the audience?
I'd say probably August or September of 22.
Recently.
Yeah. So because so interesting. I had a conversation, like when you guys have podcasts and all of a sudden you start getting a little bit of traction, all of a sudden everyone wants to be your production company. Like they call
Nice.
you, they email you, they market to you, like all that stuff. You get blown up on LinkedIn DMs and all that stuff to where people's like, we can make your podcast better. We can get you 100,000 downloads in 3 hours. Like everyone's trying to do it. And it's really annoying. I'm a sales guy and I'm telling people that's annoying, but it's, I got the feedback from one person who was a guest on my show from the very beginning. And I had asked him on the show. No, it wasn't on the show, but I asked him afterwards when we stopped recording. I was like, what are some shows you really like? And 2 out of the 3 were short form. And I didn't even think anything of it. I didn't even like think to dig into it. I was just, excited from the show that we just did. Really good episode. I still get good sound bites from that one. I think it was like the first show I did, but he said it then, and then didn't listen to anything, didn't change anything, continued the process. And then I did a poll on LinkedIn. I think like July, where it was, what are your, I asked the question of, what length do you like your podcast to be? Right. And I gave the options. It was like 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 hour. And most of them were in that shorter bracket of 15 and 30 minutes, which was really interesting. And so
really interesting. I almost don't want to believe it. Like
it's tough for me to do it too.
Rogan's
like,
3 hours, which I call that a unit measurement of Rogan. That's one
Rogan
3 hours long.
Well, it comes down to like, what is your podcast for? Like, what are you doing? Like, if it wasn't, like I went into it originally with, I'm doing this with no intention of ever running an ad, with no intention of making money from it. I want this because it was meant to be like the starting ground of promoting my stuff everywhere else. And so it's going to be that free consumption thing where it's like, I'm not here to sell you, anything like that. Now that seems to be like the favorite thing that people say on podcasts, but it started turning into this thing where it was like, hey, you talk about things that not a lot of other podcasts talk about. You get into these things and he's like, it'd be a really good platform for this. I'm like, no. And then, so I did the poll just to check. And then I got feedback from a friend of mine who has a podcast that's got like 60,000 subscribers. That is, in sales. He used to be part of the company SellingSaaS, and 60,000. I'm like, holy crap. I didn't even realize these are tight, because he had he kind of similar, he talked to more sales reps and I talked to more like VPs and stuff. He was like, I had the same thing. He used to be called Sales Hustle was the podcast a long time ago. And then they transitioned it. And he was like, yeah, I did the short form stuff out of accident. Just because he started running out of guests and he was super busy with work. And so they started releasing snippets of previous episodes that didn't really have much. And all of a sudden it started to like grow. And he was like, that's all I do now. And so it made me really look at who's my audience, who is listening to this and who's going to benefit from this. And what is their consumption habits like, and started doing a little more research on that and started asking questions and reaching out to people that I know that meet that. And it's like, hey, if there was a podcast, and I would just ask people, it's like, hey, if there was a podcast that was, under 10 minutes that gave you, that tactical information about X, would that be something that's easier to consume? And it was like resounding yes. I think there was like one person that said no. But it was just interesting because I don't like that. That's right. I don't like that. I like longer form. I like hearing the whole conversation, but it's just interesting because I always wonder, even now when they're edited, because I have an editing company do it, I'm always wondering, like, what are the things that are missed? Like, out of that hour-long recording, what's not being heard on there? So one day I'll go back through all of them, but it's been interesting because then there's more editing that's done per show, because then you have to, if you have an outro and an intro type thing, then those have to be added in there. It's multiple postings you have to do every day. Like if you don't have a process to sit down and schedule them out, like it becomes a little more daunting. Like if you promote the show at all, you have to produce multiple types of social content. Like it is a process and a half. But I've gotten some pretty good feedback on it so far, and we've been doing it for 2 months now. I think there's like 40 or 50 short form shows that are on there, and it's been going pretty decently. And my friend who has this 65,000 follower show, I asked him the other day, and I was like, hey man, like I've gotten kind of a dip on followers and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, how long have you been doing this now? I was like, we've been running this format for 2 months. He was like, not nearly long enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how long do you need to be running it? And he was like, you should be doing it like this for 6 months. He's like, if 6 months goes by and you haven't gotten more traction than you have now, then we can talk about formatting. But he was like, not enough time, not a big enough sample size in terms of date and time being in the market with that to even consider changing something. I was like, all right. Yeah.
Full speed ahead, man. Wow. So on this perfect tie into the last question. And actually, before we get to that, I went half Rogan on my marketing show. I've recently brought it back to an hour. Yeah. But I'm really tempted to go half Rogan on this show because I'm just so fascinated. And sometimes you just want that time. And I know you've got that 30 buffer, but I also want the guest, to buffer it. What's that? Yeah.
If you want to keep going, I can keep going.
Oh no, we're actually doing that. Like, so when we're done here in a few minutes, it will be an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious.
Yeah, I didn't realize how much time we
chat again because it's a fantastic topic, right? It's like so interesting. But here's my final question for you. If we were to chat again, and we should definitely do this, 50 episodes from now, right? A podcast year if you're only going once a week.
Yeah.
We chat again. What do you want that future show to look like when we chat that next time? Where do you want it to be 50 shows from now?
Well, 100,000 followers would be great.
All right. Nice.
But I was thinking about this the other day, actually. I really like where it's at. I kind of like the short form. I like the conversations that we're having. Some of them have been really, really, really deep, really impactful. I wouldn't say controversial, but they're really good topics. But I think more 100,000 followers would be really great in a year's time. It's possible, obviously, but I would love to get better at the content from the show. Like I don't struggle with getting guests. I do most of my own booking. I tried having someone else do it, but it just doesn't feel real. I like doing my own booking. And then I'd want to do better about repurposing the content from the show. I think that's the big thing because I like the conversations. I don't feel like it's work, especially since I don't have to do all the editing. Right. When it was me, it was like 3 hours each episode. I was like beating my head against the wall. It's tough, especially if you use Audition. Like if you don't run a Mac, like, oh my gosh, it's quite the process. But I'd want to get better about repurposing the content, not just for promoting the show to get more followers and stuff, but when you get into that flow state with somebody, you have such a good conversation with them, and it's almost a shame that more of it doesn't get shared on the different platforms, whether it's short form video on things like YouTube Shorts or TikTok or whatever. Like, I really want to get better. And that's what I'm trying to do right now is I'm getting a VA that will help repurpose some of the video and audio clips and stuff. But I want to get better about repurposing the content that comes from it. Like looking a year out from now, like I would love to be able to have like the YouTube version of it to where maybe there is the full hour recording, but on the podcast side of it, it is the 5-7 minute clips. But then on YouTube, it's the full hour that people can go experience the whole thing. And
nice.
Then, so it's like getting really good about distributing and repurposing it instead of just doing the one thing and calling it good. I feel like there's so much power in being able to communicate to people in the way that they like to do their consumption, like you were talking about earlier. And I feel like that limits a lot of people in their reach and being heard and the level of impact that they have. But I think the goal of the show is like, I really want to help more startup founders understand the reality of scaling like revenue acquisition, where it's not as simple as, a lot of these late stage companies talk about. It's not. And so I don't know what that means just yet, but the goal is to help people in the startup arena to truly understand, here's the actual work it takes. And so maybe that's, invite to speak at a conference about working with startups, or maybe it's having certain guests on the show, like a Jason Lemkin or like a Mark Roberge, or like people in that, and maybe your audience don't know who they are, but or they do. Yeah. But it's having guests on the show that really make an impact to the people that hear them. You know, it's one thing to be able to just schedule anybody, but and I'm not saying that guests that don't have a social presence aren't important, but I want to be able to have that time to where I have the stage with them. I have the ability to ask them those questions and really help more people through uncertain, hard times, right? Because whether we're heading into an economic winter or a recession right now, or whatever your perception on it is, like, we need to get better about controlling the truth around what's shared on media and social media and the news. And so it's not like I'm, trying to fight politics and all that crap, but it's like in the VC world right now, layoffs and like all these things, and people are scrambling and freaking out. And it's like, whoa, it's literally a small pocket of the tech community that's doing that. And it's just getting way overblown out. I mean, yes, it's really bad. Layoffs are horrible, but it's like, you've got all these other companies that aren't having problems at all. But yet we're talking about, we're in this huge recession. I'm like, recession hasn't even started yet. This is nowhere near where we were at in 2008, which was one of the worst economic things in history, where people are complaining about, interest rates are going up. I'm like, you weren't alive in 2008 to know what bad interest rates are.
True.
When we get back up to 9 and 10%, then we can start complaining, because that's what it was back. So that's my goals. Like, I want to have such a greater impact. Like, cool. If we run ads, awesome. Like, that's always a revenue stream. But I would rather promote my own stuff, like my own course content, and push people to the content and have the impact on it. Because I think if you're getting into podcasting just to make money, it's gonna be really hard for you. I think
it's a long road.
Oh, it's so long. Like, it takes a long time to get a single review, even if you ask for it on every show. It takes a long time for it to get traction, for to understand how the importance of SEO inside of the show notes, like all of these things. And it just, unless you've been on another show that's done really, really well, it takes 6, 9, 12 months to get any traction, and you'll be 300 episodes deep. And then all of a sudden you get going. And so anyways, so 50 episodes out, or a year in podcasting, 100,000 followers, the impact of certain types of guests that I can have on the show. Not even thinking about ads or anything like that, but if it does get to a revenue stream, then that's great. But I'm looking for the impact. I'm looking for the type of material and conversations that we can have that truly help founders and people in those startups to get the truth and the reality of what it actually takes to go build a multi-million-dollar SaaS company.
Yeah, you're gathering this data. You want to help people, man. I'm totally getting that. I think that noble purpose really is what drives such good results in the future, is when you genuinely want to help people, want to see them succeed. And then, just like you can tell when they're not curious, I think you can tell when they really do want to help you. And so that is so powerful, man. Where can people reach out? Where can they get in touch? What's the show?
Yeah.
Throw us URLs. What's the jam?
Anywhere on social, just search my name, Duane Dufault. I'm most active and engage on LinkedIn. That just seems to be where B2B professionals are. You can literally search my name on it's the same on Twitter. It's the same on Facebook, the same on TikTok. No, hey, you never know. You gotta have a password for that one. You can watch me eat chips. I'm just kidding.
Eat chips on OnlyFans. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's the same name everywhere. My business name and the podcast name. Even if you go on Apple Podcasts or Podlink or something and search my name, it'll pop up. It's just SellingSaaS. That's just the word selling and then SaaS, SaaS. But you can go to DuaneDufault.com. You can go to SellingSaaS.io. Just that's the tricky part, because someone else owned the .com, which was great. But I've got things everywhere. I've got online course content coming out for helping people get into tech sales and then into sales leadership, but constantly doing things different, speaking engagements into 23. And then we release an episode every single day on the SellingSaaS podcast. So again, they're 5 to 7 minute clips, and it's a different guest every day. And we try to keep it to topics that are around go-to-market strategies for marketing, sales, product-led growth, that type of stuff.
Love that. Go to market. Let's go.
Yeah.
You may be seen again on the Hardcore Marketing Show.
Right.
Talk go to market, which is a popular topic over there. So, dude, awesome. Thank you so much for coming on here, schooling me up. I've got so much notes. I've been learning a bunch. You you get some people together and you just talk about how you approach things. I learned a lot from your research. And also I really learned a lot about not only not making assumptions, but what is the context around the answer? And with that being the case, you'll never get bored again. Yeah. So thanks for coming on here, man. I really appreciate it.
It was fun. And hopefully everyone that's listening, one, they're still on this long into the show, but that they're able to take at least, if someone listening to this can take one or two things from it and be able to apply it to their podcast and be able to see some traction with it, then I've done my job. They don't have to apply everything because there's a lot of stuff, but if they can take one thing away and see some results from it, then my life goal is fulfilled.
Hell yeah. And for those listening, if you did learn something, and I freaking know you did, because I literally have 2 pages of notes over here, ran out of room, right? Drawn in the margins. Then share this with someone else. Be a thought leader. One person, 3 people, 9,000 people. Yeah. That's how it is. Just get good information in other people's hands. With that, Duane, you are the man, sir. Let's chat again. Let's have you back on another 9 more times to just geek out on this topic.
Awesome. Casey, super appreciate you, man. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Hell yeah. With that, everyone, that has been another, by the way, that was my exit. See that back and forth and everything. So you didn't need to know about it. You just sort of like, you came through it with me. Yeah. It was like respond and answer kind of. Anyways, that's the exit. But this is a meta show, so we can talk all about those things. Anyways, this has been an cool, fun episode of Creating the Greatest Show. We will see you all next time.
Awesome. Talk to you guys later. Bye.
See, that was like a cell phone ending right there.
We did so much
the last word in, dude. What are you jumping in? You're trying to ruin my ending.
That's when you get 2 hosts together. It's tough not to.
Right? You get 2 hosts together. This is great. This is the after party. We'll see you guys. And next time doesn't have to be next week. Life's too short, and we have way too much to talk about. Find show notes full of takeaways, lessons, and links at creatingthegreatestshow.com. For more information on launching your own podcast or working with us to produce your existing show, come on down to the big tent at ringmaster.com. Until then, friends, whatever you do, do it with all your might. Work at it, if necessary, early and late, in season and out of season, not leaving a stone unturned and never deferring for a single hour that which can be done just as well now. P.T. Barnum.